What's up, everyone? It's XFlyGuy here, and today is a special day. It's special because this is my first ever tutorial video that I'm doing on my channel. And as I kick off this channel, I thought, what a better way to get this whole thing started than to do a tutorial video on my favorite plane in the game. And that plane is what you see right here. It's the 737, and particularly the 737 Zibo mod. You'll see exactly why I like this plane, but this plane is on a level of payware aircraft that range, anywhere from $80 to $90. But the team that developed this plane have made it completely free, and that's probably the number one reason why it's my favorite plane in the game. So I hope you learned something. But other than that, sit back and relax, and I'll see you on the flight deck. Welcome to the flight deck. We're sitting at a sunny Boston Logan Airport today. We're sitting at gate Alpha 14, and today we're going to be doing a fairly short flight. It is we're going over to Baltimore, which is it's a little over an hour, I think, flight. Not very long, but I wanted to do just a kind of top-level tutorial on the Zibo 737, just to kind of show you the procedures that I go through when I fly this plane. For those of you who don't know, the Zibo is a modded version of the default 737 that comes with X-Plane, and this team of developers have really taken this plane above and beyond expectations for a freeware aircraft. I mean, this thing, it is on up there with payware planes that could cost, almost $100. Just the depth of systems that they've simulated in this thing, it really is incredible. So I really just want to, I know when you get into a new plane that has a lot of systems simulated, it can be kind of a daunting task to learn the systems, figure out how to turn the thing on, how to, fly from A to B, how to land. So I really just wanted to make this video and show you what I do when I go on my flights, and hopefully give you a procedure that you can, memorize and learn, so that you can fly this thing efficiently. I'm going to get my flight plan ready, and I'll be back in just a second. So first things first, if I need to do a tutorial on how to download and install this aircraft, I will do that. I don't really want to go into that in this tutorial, just for time's sake. But if I have enough response that says, okay, I can't get this thing downloaded, I need help with that, and I will do that. But I will link I will put a link down in the description below that will take you to the forum thread where you can download this thing. And there's really good instruction there, and there's a lot of ways you can look up how to download this thing. It's fairly easy, but I will put that link down below so you know exactly where to get this thing. So first off, the first thing I do, so we have this electronic flight bag here, or this iPad or tablet. And there really is a lot of things you can do here. You can make announcements, you can simulate, flights as far as passengers and flight attendants. There's a lot of things you can do here that, I really don't want to get too far into, just because, again, I can make a whole separate video on this thing right here. But today I really just wanted to kind of do a top level, just get the thing going. Not real in-depth flight, as far as trying to explain everything, but, just trying to start at the top level, say, okay, these are the bare minimums that you need to do to fly this thing from A to B. So where we're going to start today is at this button here that says fuel, weight, and balance. So when you hit fuel, weight, and balance, there's two things that you have to enter here. one being the payload and the other being fuel. And to get these values, there's several different ways you can kind of, you could make up values if you wanted to, as long as, you're getting the right fuel for, the length of distance you're going. But something that I use that, I think is a great tool, it's free, is SimBrief. So SimBrief is a website, www.simbrief.com, and I'll link that below as well. SimBrief is a free flight planner that allows you to basically just put in where you want to go. Like today, I put in I want to go from Boston to Baltimore. I put in what plane I'm in, so the 737-800, and I basically just hit generate, and the thing gives me a full flight plan. A lot more information than you'll ever really need. But it's a great tool that kind of puts out a route for you, so you don't have to worry about what waypoints I need to go to, what departure or arrival did I need to do. But SimBrief is a great free tool that does it all for you. So again, I'll link it below, and just it's a completely free piece of software. And if you really want to get to that level of simulation, I think it's something that you really should use. So I'm looking at my flight plan that I generated for today's flight, and as far as payload goes, it looks like I have 39.3, which is in thousands of pounds. So this is 39,300 pounds. And as far as fuel goes, it's like my final fuel is 16,397. So we'll take that down to 16.3 or 16.4. We'll round up. And you see how the levels kind of change when I change the value. It's just it kind of shows just a visual of where the fuel level is, where the center of gravity is. And so that's it for this. I mean, your CG is automatically calculated. You can shift it if you need to. You don't really need to mess with that. So that's really all you need to do over here. So we'll just hit home on that. So now the next thing we want to do is go up to our overhead panel and kind of get this plane going as far as an electrical standpoint. So first thing I always do is I go right here to this battery switch and I flip that down. So you can hear things kind of coming alive as I do that. Next thing I do is I go to the emergency exit lights and I flip those on. And for the remainder of going through these switches, I know there's a lot of switches, and you can kind of say, whoa, this is way too much, but it's really not that bad. So one thing that I do, and it's something that pilots in the real world do as well, is they flow through this thing in a certain order. So usually on the 737, you'll start from the left, and you'll flow top to bottom all the way across. And that's just a way that you can efficiently get through these switches and make sure that you're not missing anything. So it's something that I like to use, and once you do it a couple times, you'll really learn where everything is, and it'll become a lot easier. So everything up here, we're not touching that. Yaw damper will come to later because you actually can't activate that until a little later on in the procedure. We're not touching anything on the navigation. First thing we're going to come down here and do is, actually before we start that, we actually need to put on our ground power. So ground power, that actually is going to pull power from the GPU that's sitting outside the plane. And it's good for us to do that because we don't want to drain our battery. So now you can see here our DC amps for the battery is 0. So now we know that we are on GPU power. And you can see that here. So first thing we want to do is come down to the left aft fuel pump and turn that on. And you'll see the light extinguish here to tell us that is on. And the reason why we turn this one on first is because that supplies fuel to the APU generator, which we'll get to here in a minute. So after that, we come down here to the second column. We start going down. They're really just, it depends on what you want to look at. It's just an electrical bus monitor that lets you see, like, okay, what's on, what's not. So you really don't have to mess with this if you don't want to, but it's something I like to use as far as a visual to ensure myself that, okay, this generator's on, I can switch over to it. So moving down here, we've already done ground power. The generator bus we're not going to worry about right now. We are going to turn some lights on though. So we'll turn the circuit breaker and the panel lights on, and that just kind of gives us a nice glow to everything. We'll come back down to our default view. We'll hide the yoke by clicking right here on this click spot, and we'll turn these on. You know, you don't have to do this, but I like to do it just to, you know, just so I can see things better. So next we're going to come down to the radio stack, and there's some more lights here. We won't worry about the flood, and we'll turn that panel on. So that's it as far as lights. So moving on down our center column here, this is a no smoking sign. We'll turn that on. Seatbelt signs, we'll turn those on. Coming up top, window heat, we will turn that on. Probe heat, we'll wait for just a little bit to turn those on. Hydraulic pumps, it really depends on when you turn these on. But normally what airlines will do is the pilot will call down to the ground crew and say, is everyone free of like the gear and the wings? And if they say, okay, we are, then they'll go ahead and turn those hydraulics on. So we'll just simulate that now. So moving down, nothing to do here. Moving up top, all the air conditioning, that is, you know, automated, so it'll do it, you know, by itself. You don't really have to do anything there. Packs, we will turn to auto. The APU bleed we will turn on. And now coming down to the pressurization panel. Today I'm looking back at my flight plan. We're going up to 34,000 feet. So I'll put that here. So 34,000. So that tells the panel, okay, we're going up this high. Pressurize the cabin as we go up, and it'll do it automatically. You don't have to worry about doing it manually. So landing altitude will come to later on, and now we'll turn on some exterior lights. So our position, we will turn on steady, and that turns on the red and green lights on the tips of the wings. Logo light, we don't need that because it's daytime. Anti-collision light will come to later. And okay, so I think we're ready to turn on the APU now. So the APU is a small turbine in the back of the airplane, and it, you know, and as it fires, it'll actually provide electrical power to the plane, and it allows us to run off of our own power rather than have to be dependent on the ground power. So to turn the APU on, we'll switch it down to on, and then we'll click and hold in the start position until you see this needle start moving. Once that starts moving, we'll let go, and this thing will spool up, and then it will start coming back down. And when it gets around, you know, 4.5 to 4, we will see this light come on, and what that tells us is that the electrical power from the APU is available for us to use. And I know the air can kind of be loud. You heard the air come on, so I'll turn down the sound here a little bit. So I know that can kind of get annoying. So we're coming back down slowly, just waiting for it to come down. So there you go. So now the APU power is available. So we'll go ahead and switch that on both sides. So now if we switch this up here to APU, we see that we are getting power from the APU. So now we can come off of ground power, and we actually can come down here to the iPad, go to ground services, and disconnect the GPU. So now we are running officially on our own power. So as far as the overhead panel for right now, we are actually good to go. One other thing we need to do is come up here to the Irs panel, and the IRSs take a while to align, so we want to go ahead and get those initialized. And the way we do that is we come to this left side, we go to align, we wait for the on DC LED to go out, then we switch it over to nav, and that one's ready to go. So then we do the same thing for the right one. We go to align, wait for this to go out, and then switch it over to nav. And that's all you have to do. So up here there's a knob, and there's this setting here that's called heading and status. So we can switch that over to heading and status, and you see this number pop up, and what that number is the amount of minutes that it takes for the irises to align. So you can see that it takes a little bit, so you want to go ahead and get that started so you're not waiting on it. So now we are officially done with the overhead panel for now. So the next thing we want to do is go down to our FMC and start programming in our flight plan. So to get started, we want to click on the FMC button, and from there you can just kind of see your information. We got the latest airways in our FMC. We're in the right plane. Next we go to position initialization, and in reference airport we want to put our origin airport, which today is Boston, so KBOS. Enter that. You see these coordinates come up, and we want to take those coordinates and put them here in the set IRS position. So we just click, it copies it, and then we click here and it puts it in there. Easy as that. So now our IRSs can officially start aligning. Next we go to route. It copies over our origin airport, so then we just put it here in origin. Destination, today we're going to Baltimore, so KBWI. Company route and flight number, they're not important. You don't have to put them in there. You can, just depending on how deep a simulation you want to go into. So today I'm just going to put in a random number, Southwest 1234. Like I said, it doesn't really matter what you put here. Okay, from there we want to go to our departure and arrival page. We see here departure from Boston. We click that, and today, looking back at my flight plan, it looks like we are departing from the PATS 5 departure. So we don't see it here, but we see that there are more pages available, so we'll go to the next page. Here you see the PATS 5 departure, so we'll click that. Looking back at my flight plan, looks like we're departing off of runway 15 right, so we will click that, and then we'll go back to route. We'll hit activate and execute. So now we want to start entering our waypoints after we do the departure. So you see here there's another page, so we'll click next page. So the last waypoint in our PATS SID is the PATS waypoint. So from there, looking back at my flight plan again, I see that from there we go direct to the waypoint Neely. Enter that, and then from there we go to the Charlie Mike Kilo VOR. From there we're getting on the Juliet 75 airway, and then we're getting off the Juliet 75 on the Mike X-Ray Echo VOR. And then from there we go directly to Nuggy, which is an incredible name for a waypoint. And that is our last waypoint before we start our arrival into Baltimore. So there, we'll hit execute. And now we'll go back to our departure and arrival page, and we'll do our arrival into Baltimore. So we click arrive. Today we're coming in on the Trish 3, so we'll go to the next page where we see Trish 3. We'll click that. You see here Nuggy, that's our last waypoint in our flight plan, so that's our transition. And it looks like we're landing on runway 10, so we will do the ILS 10 just for demonstration purposes today. And that's it, so we'll hit execute. So that is the complete route programmed in. It's that easy. So now we'll go back to route. The next thing we're going to do is go to performance initialization. So remember those numbers that we put in the iPad earlier, the payload and the fuel. So what that helps the plane calculate is the gross weight and the zero fuel weight. And so it'll actually take that from the pad automatically. So the only thing we have to do here is just press this button next to it, and you can see how it pops everything in for us. So next we come down to reserve fuel, And our reserve fuel is just the fuel that we may need if we can't land in Baltimore for whatever reason, and if we have to divert to our alternate airport. So looking back at my flight plan, looks like my reserves today are 2.2 thousand pounds. So we'll enter that. Our cost index today, we're in, the flight plan will automatically generate a cost index for you. You can use that, that's fine. Southwest usually uses a number of 35 or 40, so I'm just going to put 40 in today. And all this number does, it's a ratio of expense versus fuel burn. It's just a number that the airlines have monetized to the point where they can say, okay, prices are going up, they're going down, we can change this number accordingly so they can better accurately track the cost of their flights. And what it does is it increases or reduces the how fast you do your climb and your descent. And so it changes your fuel burn a little bit. So anyways, just you can really put any number you want to, but normally you just put in whatever the flight plan says. And today, like I said, I know that Southwest uses 35 or 40, so I'm just going to put 40 in. So anyway, so now we go to our cruise altitude. And today I said that we're going to 34,000 feet, so I'll put 340 and enter that. Cruise wind, ISA deviation, all this, you don't have to put that in. You can if you want to. Transition altitude, since we're in the United States, is 18,000 feet. If you were in Europe, it would be lower, or another country. So just make sure that's correct. And once you verified all that is correct, you just hit execute. Now it is important that you hit execute on this page, because if you don't, the VNAV will not engage on the plane. That is something that I had when I was first starting out learning planes. I had to learn that the hard way. I'm in flight, I'm trying to engage my VNAV, and I couldn't do it. So just make sure that you hit execute whenever you put your performance numbers in. So next, we'll go to the M1 limit. Now, M1 limit is the percentage of D rate that you're going to tell the engines to thrust to on takeoff. So by default, the engines are going to do 100% thrust. But depending on how heavy you are that particular flight, you don't want to do 100% because it may be way too much thrust than what you need to take off. And so airlines have developed this thrust limit so that they can extend the life of their engines. And there's some software like TopCat that can calculate this number for you, but normally I don't really mess with that. I just I kind of just make up a number, just because I from experience I know how much thrust I really need for a certain length of runway. I know here in Boston, runway 15 right is a fairly long runway, so I'm just going to put in like 30 here for my assumed temperature. And you see that actually didn't bring it down that much. The higher you go, the lower that your rate will go down. But I'm going to go down to the takeoff 1, which takes me down to 96%. In the 737, if you've got a runway that's above like 8,000 feet long, usually 90% will get you off the ground just fine. So that's all we have to do here. So now we're going to go to takeoff. So standard takeoff for Southwest is flaps 5. Flaps 5 is pretty standard for the 737 with any company. If you had a really long runway and you're really light, you could use flaps 1. And if you're really heavy in a short runway, you could use flaps 10. So again, that's just dependent on your use case, but flaps 5 is usually a safe bet. Your center of gravity is auto-calculated from your tablet. So you just click the key next to that, and that gives you a trim value, which will come in handy later on. So next, all we have to do is confirm our V speeds. So V1 is the safe speed that we can, or is the speed as you're going down the runway that you have to take off from. And again, this is calculated based off the runway length and the weight of the airplane. So once you hit V1, there's only extreme cases that pilots will not take off the runway after they hit V1. So V1 today is 139. V-rotate is exactly how it sounds. It's the speed at which we rotate the plane to take off. So that's 140. And V2 is the safe speed that a plane can fly with just one engine. So that is 148 today. And that is it as far as programming the FMC. Like I said, it's fairly easy. It only takes a few times doing it to really get the hang of it. So just don't be intimidated by it. It's really easy. So now that we're done here, the next thing I like to do is I like to note the V2 speed, which is 148. And from there, I'll go up to my MCP panel, and I'll put V2 plus 20 into the targeted speed. So that will be 168 today. And what that does is it gives a good, safe speed that is above your minimum V2 speed, so you can target that with one engine if one engine was to go out. So 168 is the value that I'm using today. That's V2 plus 20. Next thing I want to do is turn on the flight directors, and depending on which side of the plane you're flying on, it does matter which one you turn on first. So whichever side you're on, you want to turn that one on first, and that turns on this MA light, which just says it's the master side. So we'll turn on both. Okay, so next thing we want to do is put in the runway heading, which for 15 right is 145, I think, for Boston. It may be 149. I think it's 149. I'll have to double check that. I'll have to bring on the charts. Anyways, we'll come back to that. Target's altitude is the top altitude that the plane will go to when it's in manage mode or autopilot. So I know that on the PATS 5 departure that the top altitude is 5,000 feet, so I already have 5,000 in here, so that's good. Sorry, I pulled up my chart right here just to verify that runway heading. 15 right is 150, so we'll go ahead and change that. So we are going to change our bank limiter to 30 degrees, and that's going to tell the plane, okay, don't go past 30 degrees when you're making turns in managed mode. So, and at lower altitudes, 30 degrees is fine, so we'll stick with that. Alright, from there, we are done with the MCP. And we'll go back up to our overhead panel, and we're actually pretty close to being ready to push back. So there's a couple things we need to do. Turn on the yaw damper, and the yaw damper is just a way for the computer to manage the tail fin or the rudder on the airplane, and it kind of dampens the movement so that when you're back in the cabin, you're not swaying back and forth and getting sick. So it's a good way to keep your passengers nice and happy. So I want to make sure we have that on. Since we're getting ready to push back, we'll go ahead and turn the fuel pumps on. The probe heat we will go ahead and turn on. We have the hydraulics on. In order to start the engines on the 737, you do have to turn off the packs. I'm gonna wait to do that until we get, right before we're ready to push back, because that's providing air conditioning to the passengers in the back, and so in order to keep them happy, I'm gonna wait till the very last second before I turn those off. So all we have to do now is turn on the anti-collision light, and what that does is that turns on the red beacon light. And sorry if this is a little loud. Turns on this red beacon light and tells everyone behind us and around us that, hey, we're fixing to back up and start this plane. So after that, we are ready to go. We're going to put the yoke back on, and we're going to request the pushback. So another great free plugin for X-Plane is Better Pushback, and it allows you to take complete control over the pushback procedure in this plane, and that's really important because using the default, you kind of get mixed results, and so I think it really is a must plugin that you want to have if you want to be as realistic as possible, because you can have complete control on where your plane is going. So to get here, I just went to ground services and then better pushback, and then I will hit pre-plan. So now you see I've got this little icon of my plane, and I can tell exactly where I want to go. So I've actually already done this previously, so is exactly where I want it to go. So to confirm that, I'm going to hit enter. So now they're saying they've acknowledged my plan, and whenever I'm ready, I can call them. So I'm going to hit request pushback. And now they're sending the tow truck over here to get connected. So I'm going to cut away here because it does take a little bit for them to get connected just for the sake of time. And I'll be back when we're ready to push back and start the engines. Alright, the push truck is here connected and we are ready to push back. So to start the pushback, we are going to release the parking brake. But first, remember when I said we have to turn the packs off to start the engines on the 737? So we're going to go ahead and do that since we're ready to push back. You'll see these needles move. And what that does is that rediverts the air from the cabin to the engines so that they can turn the turbines and start the engines. So we've already got our anti-collision light on, so all we have to do now is release the parking brake. Alright, so we're pushing back and they said we can start engines. So we're going to wait until we clear some of this stuff before we actually start the engines. Make sure we don't hit this truck. That was close. Okay, so to start the engines, we're going to start number 2 first. So right here where it says engine start, these switches, we're going to switch that to the left to ground. And what we're going to do here is we're going to wait for N2 here to get up to around 21%. And when it hits 21%, we're going to switch up the number 2 fuel lever and introduce fuel into the engine. So there's 21%. We switch that up. So now what we're looking here for is oil pressure rising. Vibration is okay. Oil temp is okay. We're watching the engine temperature to make sure that it doesn't go above this red line. And when it gets around 55-60%, you'll hear a click. And what that click is saying that, okay, the engine's stable and the starter is cut out. So we're going to switch that over to continuous. And we have a good start on number 2. So now we're just going to do the exact same thing for number 1. So we'll switch it to ground. N2 is rising. Waiting for 21%. There's 21. Switch up the fuel. Oil pressure. Vibration, temperature. Watching the temperature here. They're done with the pushback, so we'll go ahead and throw on the parking brake. Alright, and we have a good stable start on both engines. So we'll come back here to the overhead panel. And the first thing we'll do is we'll throw on the engine generators, because now we have power coming from the engines rather than the APU. And now that we've done that, we can turn off the APU so we're not burning any extra fuel. We'll come over here, we'll turn the packs back on. We'll turn off the APU bleed because we don't need that anymore. And we'll put the isolation valve back up to auto. So now we are done up here. We can switch this over to Gen 2, just make sure that we have power coming from both engine generators. So we do. Let him go through his procedure. So what we're going to do now in the meantime is we're going to switch the auto brake down to RTO, and that's for rejected takeoff. We're going to look at our trim that we calculated earlier at 4.87 units, and we're pretty close here. You don't have to get it exactly, just, you know, as long as you're pretty close, it's fine. So we're good there. We're going to switch our MDF over to flight controls so that we can do a flight control check here in a second. We'll see that he's clear and everything's good, so we're going to set our takeoff flaps, so flaps 5. See that they're transitioning here until they get to 5. And while those things are moving, we are going to do a flight control check. So watching down here, we're going to go full left, full right, neutral, full up, full down, neutral, then rudder, full left, full right, and neutral. So flight controls are good, so we'll go ahead and turn that off. And now all we have left to do is turn on our lights, our runway and taxi lights, and we are ready to start taxiing. So again, for the second time, I'm going to start taxiing here, and I won't make you sit here and watch me taxi all the way to the runway. So I'll cut away again for just a couple seconds, and I will meet you back when we're holding short of the runway. Alright, we are holding short of runway 15 right, and we are just about ready to take off, but we need to do a couple things first before we taxi onto the runway. So first thing is we need to turn on the landing lights. Next, we need to turn on to our strobe lights. Oh, and I accidentally turned on the lower light. You gotta hear some of the sounds that are modeled in the Zibo. Here I'm kind of talking back and forth.
Okay, the cabin is secured. Have a good flight.
Alright, so that turns on the white strobing lights, and it's just a positional light thing. Next, we'll come down to the MCP. We'll arm the auto throttle. We'll arm VNAV and LNAV. And don't worry if LNAV doesn't automatically engage like right off. It just depends on what heading you are and how far away you are from your initial heading that was programmed into your FMC. If it doesn't come on, just wait till you get on the runway, hit it again, and then you'll be good to go. Okay, so we'll come down now. We'll turn on our TCAS system, and that just allows us to see any traffic that may be ahead of us. We'll turn on the weather radar, and that's this button here. Now make sure that we don't, hit any major turbulence in the air. And okay, I think we're ready to go. So we'll release the parking brakes, give us a little power, and we'll taxi onto the runway. Alright, we're going to look left. We're clear left. We're clear right. So we are good to taxi on. Do our best here to line up with the center line, which is easier said than done. A trick that I like to use, I like to wait till the center line is about shoulder, align with my shoulder, and then I start my turn. Just a little more power so we don't stop. Alright, now it's fairly good. I'm happy with that. So we'll stop here. We will set the parking brake. And what I want to do is I wanted to kind of talk you through the takeoff procedure, because I know when I'm actually doing it, it can go kind of fast, and I don't want to confuse you. So I'm going to kind of talk you through the steps, and then I'll actually do it, and then you can kind of say, okay, well, I know what he's going to do next. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to spool up the engines to around 40% in one. And I'm going to wait, and when they stabilize, I'll say, okay, engines are stable, and then I'll release the parking brake, and I'll spool up my engines all the way up to the takeoff thrust, which is where the green arrow is. And that's going to take our engines up to that N1 that we set earlier at 96.1. So once that happens, we will hold the center line. I'll say the airspeed is alive, which you'll see this green arrow shoot up, and the airspeed tape will start moving. So then the first call out will be 80 knots by my non-existent co-pilot here. You're here 80 knots, which is just simulated in the Zibo. I'll check 80 knots. So then from there, you'll see that V1 speed. And the V1 speed, remember, is the speed that we are taking off no matter what. It's no longer safe to stop the plane on the runway. We have to take off. So we'll be taking off at V1. Next will come VR, or rotate. And you see that they're pretty close here, 139 and 140. So that will happen pretty quick. You'll just hear V1 rotate. So on rotate, I will pull the yoke back and tilt the nose up to 10 degrees nose up. And once I do that, the plane will lift off the runway. You'll hear my co-pilot say positive rate. And when he says that, I'll say gear up, and I'll throw the gear up. And once that happens, I'll pull the nose up to about 15 degrees nose up. And what that will do is it'll keep my takeoff speed in check around close to what we set, that V2 plus 20. And I'll hold that till we get around 1,000 feet, 1,500 feet up in the air. I'll follow my flight director, which is going to be following our flight path that we programmed in. And once I get around 1,000 feet, 1,500 feet, I'll go ahead and engage the autopilot. So I know that was a lot, but hopefully now that I've explained that, it'll be a little easier to follow as I'm doing it. So, okay, we're ready to go. So I'm going to start the clock here. I'm going to spool up the engines to 40%. Alright, they're stable. So I'm going to release the parking brake and go up to takeoff thrust. Takeoff thrust is set. Alright, the airspeed is alive. We're just holding center line here.
80 knots.
80 knots is checked.
V1, rotate.
Rotate. Pulling back to 10 degrees, nose up.
Positive rate.
Positive rate. We're going to go gear up. Alright, now we're going to go up to 15 degrees.
400.
Just holding, following the flight director.
1,000.
Alright, we're at 1,000 feet, so we're going to speed up a little bit. Push down. Alright, there's 1,500, so I'm going to engage the autopilot. Easy as that. So now, as we're speeding up, you see this flap indicator here, so we're going to go to flaps 1. Wait till it gets to this up position, and we're going to retract them fully. Update our heading here. We want to ensure that we're updating that constantly, so just in case we lose autopilot. Alright, we'll go ahead and go flaps up. So now the plane can accelerate. So from there, we're going to clean up the plane. So we're going to turn our auto brake off. Put the gear in the off position. We'll go ahead and turn off our runway and our taxi lights because our gear's gone, so we don't need that anymore. We'll set the engine starters to auto. And that's it. We've had a successful takeoff. So again, just updating the heading selector. And now we're going to go ahead and bug up our altitude. Because we don't have ATC today and we're doing whatever we want to, we're just going to go ahead and put this thing all the way up to 34,000 feet, which is my final cruise. Alright, there's 34,000. So now our plane is flying itself. All we gotta do is just monitor our speeds, make sure we don't go over 250 under 10,000 feet. Make sure everything's good, and other than that, we just sit back and enjoy the takeoff, or our departure out of Boston. So we'll get some views back here from a passenger perspective. Nice and pretty. I like to put these views in just for this purpose, because I like to see, what is a passenger seeing. So I'll go back up here. So the next thing we're waiting on is 10,000 feet. And at 10,000 feet, we're going to turn our landing lights off. So it's actually going to come up pretty quick here. At our co-pilot's view, take a look out. Nice, pretty blue sky day. Nice clouds. Great day to fly. Alright, coming up on 10,000. Alright, and 10,000 feet, so we'll hit the landing lights. You'll see our nose come down. We're going to accelerate. Now that we're above 10,000 feet, we can go faster than 250. And that's it. I mean, not much more to it than that. You're going to hear the announcements going on in the background. So from now, all we have to do now is when we hit 18,000 feet, which is our transition altitude, we'll hit the standard button, and it'll change our altimeter setting to the standard, which is, above standard. Everyone uses the same barometric pressure so that they can talk in terms of flight levels. So I'm going to cut away now because it'll take a while to get up to our cruise altitude, but once we get to our cruise altitude, I'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about setting up the plane before we get to our descent. So I'll be back in just a second. Alright, we are sitting at our final cruise altitude at 34,000 feet. And one thing that I did forget to mention while we were on the ground, so I want to kind of go through it right now, is going through our flight plan and making sure that we don't have any discontinuities in it. And the way we do that is we're going to hit our legs page. And once we're there, we're going to go to our selectors up here and switch this one over to plan. And that'll put us into our plan mode so that we can step through each waypoint individually and make sure that there's no discontinuity there. So I'm going to zoom down a little bit and then come down here, and you see how this has changed to step. So every time we hit step, it's going to go through the next waypoint and just kind of step us through. So you see here, see this line going out. And what that is it's just the last waypoint in the arrival. And normally in the real world, once you get to this point, they would assign you vectors. ATC would assign you vectors, and you would fly those vectors, and they would kind of turn you around and get you back on here to intercept the ILS. But because we're not using ATC today, I'm going to go ahead and connect our flight path together here from Brave to this column waypoint. So to do that, I'm going to go to the next page where I see column. I'm going to click column, go back to the previous page. Oh, sorry. And then put it up here where it says hoist, which is right here. So we're going to replace hoist with column. And we're going to hit execute. So what that is, that eliminated all this, and it just connected these two waypoints for us. So that way it completes my flight plan. I don't have to worry about, you know, manually flying to the ILS. You can do that if you want to be more realistic, but just for ease of use, I like to do that just so I'm not, you know, trying to guess what heading I need to be on to intercept the ILS. So, alright, so to get back out of that, we change our knob up here from plan back over to map. We'll zoom back out, and we turn sense, so I need to update my heading. And that's it. So, okay, so I just want to go back through that real quick since I forgot to do it. Ideally you want to do that on the ground before you push back as you enter your waypoints, but I had just forgotten to do that. So all we gotta do now is we just gotta wait till we get close to our top of descent, and then I'll go through the descent procedure. So I'll be back in just a second. Alright, we are about 40 miles out from our top of descent. So now is usually when I start setting up our descent and our approach into our destination. So we're going to set up our approach to Baltimore. First thing we're going to do is go down here to the FMC. We're going to go to this initialization and reference page, and we're going to select a landing flap and a landing reference speed. And again, this is dependent on how long your runway is, you know, how heavy the plane is. You know, the shorter the runway, the more flaps and the less speed you want, and then vice versa. So standard again is this 30 degrees. So we're going to do that today. We have a very long runway, so we're just going to do standard 30 flaps, and our reference speed is 147. So now that we're done with that, we can look at our ILS frequency, which is 109.7, and our final heading of 105. So we can just double check our charts. I'll go to Baltimore and approach for ILS 10, and it looks like that is correct. So our ILS frequency is 109.7 and our final heading is 105. So we will go to our radio stack, and right here on our nav radios we will set that to our ILS frequency, so 109.7, and we'll switch that over, and we'll do that here as well, and we'll switch that one over. You really only need one of these, but I like to do both just for consistency's sake. If you were to do an auto land, you would need both, but we won't need that today, but it's just good practice to do both. So now we're going to go up to our MCP panel, and we will set our final heading, which is already there. I've done this flight previously, so that's why you see that it's already there, but you just scroll this until you get that final heading. Now we want to look at our airport chart and see what our landing altitude is. And for Baltimore, our landing altitude is 143 feet. So we're going to put that in here. Let me come down a little bit. 143 and 150, it rounds up, that's fine. But what that does is it tells the cabin to depressurize all the way down to that landing altitude. So that is important to have. So now the final thing we want to do is set our altitude to our next assigned altitude in our descent. So looking at the Trish 3 arrival, it looks like if we look at the Nuggy transition, our first altitude constraint is 12,000 feet. So we'll go ahead and swing this down to 12,000. And what that does is, again, just like when we were going up, it just tells the plane, okay, you're flying yourself, but don't go below this altitude. And that's important. If ATC is assigning you an altitude, you put in whatever they say, you put it in that box. Now we'll go down here to the auto brake, and we'll set that to 2. And 2 is, again, it's a safe bet. It's right in the middle. It's usually a standard thing. Again, if you're shorter runway, you're heavier, you want to go more auto brake. If you're a longer runway, you may want to go a little bit less, but we'll just set 2. We'll set the standard just for demonstration purposes. And that's it. So we are ready for our descent. So once you put in that lower altitude into the box here, once we get to this top of descent point, the plane will actually start descending itself. So you don't have to do anything else but just put in that lower altitude, and the plane will do the rest. So the way down is fairly easy. It's just you manage your speeds, make sure that you're hitting your assigned speeds on your arrival. Make sure you're not going over 250 once you get below 2,000 or 10,000 feet. Make sure that you're hitting your altitudes. So it's really just managing the airplane as you go down. So not a whole lot you have to do, but you do want to kind of keep an eye out for those things. So again, I'm going to cut away until we get closer to our approach, just for time's sake. The descent's pretty self-explanatory. You just set the altitude and then the plane does the rest. So not very exciting. So I'll come back when we get closer to our approach, and we'll start talking about getting ready for our ILS. Alright, we are coming in nicely on our approach into Baltimore. You can see here we are coming down to 10,000 feet pretty rapidly, so we're going to do a couple things in preparation for that. Number one, we're going to turn on our landing lights, because you do need to have your landing lights on under 10,000 feet. I'll just update my heading here. Another thing is we need to go ahead and start slowing down to under 250 knots. And what I like to do is, once I get to around 10,000 feet, I like to go ahead and manage the speed of the plane myself. So what I'll do is I'll go in, I'll hit the speed intervene button here, and then I can go ahead and manually deselect that down to under 250. And to speed up the deceleration process, I'll go ahead and throw a little speed brakes on. That way we make sure we're not breaking the speed limit, and we keep everyone happy. We got real nice views out here today. It's a real pretty day for flying. Alright, so we're getting closer, so we'll go ahead and throw the speed brake back in. And now we're ready to go. So our landing lights are on. We're down on our speed, so we're ready to start descending under 10,000. So again, I'll kind of talk you through the approach and a landing process before we actually start doing it, because again, it's another thing that can kind of come up real quick. And again, I want to be as straightforward as possible without trying to confuse you guys. So what we'll do, I've already set my altitude selector down to my final altitude fix on the ILS, which is 2,500 feet. So what I'm going to do is, you can see here on the map, it's a little far out though, but once I make my final left turn towards the runway, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select this Vor Lock button. And what that does is it arms the localizer frequency to the airplane, and you'll see kind of a little tape and a little marker here on the bottom. It kind of looks similar to what's there now, but it's just a little bigger. And what that does, see, I'm speeding up here, so I need to throw on my speed brakes. So what that does is once I pick up that frequency, my plane will actually lock on to the frequency of the runway and align me perfectly with the center line of the runway. And ILSs are approaches that pilots use when there's low visibility. And today's not really a good day for that, but I wanted to show you the full flight with an ILS included. So I am going to use the ILS today. So anyway, so once I hit that VOR lock, the plane will fly at the same heading until it intercepts that, and you'll see this little triangle kind of move towards the center, and the plane will turn. So once that locks on, we'll be watching the second triangle. That you can kind of see there's a little version of it here, but it'll be a little bit bigger once we get locked on to the ILS frequency. And Once that starts coming down, we're going to hit this approach button, and what that does is it's going to wait for the glide slope frequency to come in, and once it locks into that, our plane will start descending towards the runway. So, and after that happens, you know, our plane will take us all the way down to the ground, and we'll wait till about 1,000 feet. And once we hit about 1,000 feet, I'll go ahead and take over and start flying the plane manually down until we get to the ground. So we're getting closer here. So I'm gonna go ahead and, well, I may wait a little bit longer. We're still a little far out, so I'll keep my speed up for now. So another kind of procedure that we do when we're landing, just kind of talk you through everything, is once we get closer, we're going to put our engine start switches over to continuous, and what that does is it continuously monitors the starter switches, so that if our engine were to go down, it would automatically try to restart it for us. So we'll do that. We'll slow down. I like to slow down to about 180 knots right before I make my final turn, just so I'm not, you know, pulling a lot of G's into that final turn. So I'll slow down to 180. One other trick I want to show everyone here. So one thing that you may or may not know is in the Zibo, which is actually, this is a feature in the real life aircraft too. If you go to this fixed page, you can actually put rings around the runway so that you kind of have a spatial awareness of how close you are. So to do this, hit the fixed page, then type in RW for runway, and then the number of the runway you're going to, so runway 10. Hit that, you can kind of see this ring pop up here. So I like to put in a 5-mile ring and a 10-mile ring. And the reason I do that is it's usually a good practice to have at least flaps 1 by the 10-degree ring, and by the 5-mile ring be fully configured for landing. So gear down, flaps all the way down at your final speed. So that kind of gives me a visual cue of how fast I need to start slowing down and get my plane ready to land. So that is one feature that I like to use. You may have known that already, you may not have, but it's a good tool to use. So I'll go back to my legs page here. So back to landing, and we're in the clouds now. So we'll slow down to 180. We'll put continuous. We'll put the gear down. When we get on our final, we'll put our gear down. We'll turn on our lights. We'll arm the speed brake. You kind of pull it up slightly, and then I'll put it in this arm to see this light come on. And what that'll do, when our wheels touch the ground, it'll throw up the speed brakes and help us slow down. And then once we do all that, we'll go ahead and slow down to our final reference speed that we put in here of 147 knots. And you see this wind correction. You actually want to go +5 on this. So we'll be flying our final approach at 151 knots. And we'll go, so once we do that, we'll put full flaps 30 in, and we will just have to land. So when you're landing, we're going to go ahead and slow down here. We're getting kind of close, so I'm going to go ahead and slow down to 230 knots. And I'm going to go ahead and put flaps 1 in to help us slow down. So when landing, the flare is real important. What the flare does is it kills your vertical momentum, and it also kills some of your forward momentum, and it allows you to put down the plane real easy. And a flare is kind of tricky. I'm not going to claim that I'm a master at it. It's something that with practice, you know, you get better at, and so you really just have to do it a bunch of times before you can get good at it. But what you want to do with the 737 is you're going to come down and you'll start hearing altitude callouts. And when it gets to 20 feet, you're going to do a couple things. Number one, you're going to pull the nose up. So here's the 5-degree mark and the 2.5 degree. You're going to pull the nose up between 2.5 and 5 degrees, usually closer to 2.5. And simultaneously, you're going to take the throttles all the way down to 0. So that's going to kill your forward and your vertical momentum. And If you do it right at 20 and you do it perfectly, then you should be able to just easily touch your plane down. If you do it too soon, or you pull up too much, you may float a little bit, which I usually have a tendency to do sometimes. Again, like I said, I haven't mastered it completely, and I've flown this thing for probably over 1,000 hours. So I may mess it up today. We'll see how it goes. So once you flare that, you touch down, your spoilers will come up, your auto brake will kick in, and you just hold your reverse thrust until you slow down to around 80 knots, and then you'll put your reversers back in, and then you'll take over manual braking, and you just bring it to, you slow down to about 30 knots so you can turn off the runway safely. So, alright, so hopefully talking you through that, you'll be able to kind of see what I'm doing as I'm doing it now. So now we're getting close to our final turn, so I'm going to go ahead and slow down to 210 now, and we'll go flaps 5. Help us slow down. And actually, we'll go down to 200. Keep updating our heading bug. Alright, now that we're making this turn, we'll go ahead and go down to 180. That way we can slow down in plenty of time to make this final turn here. So the airput should be behind us. I can't really see right now, but it's okay. So now you see these diamonds that have come up? That's the localizer down here at the bottom and the glide slope that I was talking about. So we are good vertically, and you'll see the localizer kick in when we get closer to this final turn. Alright, so now we're turning on to our what's called the base leg. See if we can see the airport yet. Yep, there it is off in the distance. So we're just turning around slowly.
1,000 to go.
And we're actually under our glide slope, which is a good thing. You always want to be under your glide slope before you intercept it. Because if you're too high, it's a lot harder to get back down than it is to come up a little bit. You see this arc here? That's a good thing to use to kind of gauge how fast you need to be going down. That arc is when you're going to hit this final altitude that you put into the constraint. So I'm good here. I'm going to hit 2,500 right at my waypoint here. All right, so now that I'm facing towards my final waypoint, I'm going to go ahead and hit this VOR lock button. And you can already hear some radio call-outs there. It called out 2,500. So now that I hit VOR lock, I'm just going to wait for this diamond here to go from just an outline to be, fully pink or magenta. Oh, there it goes. So that means that the localizer has captured. And you see VOR lock come in here. So this green box, that means that it is captured, and it is good. So we're going to go ahead and set our runway heading to our final heading. We're going to go ahead and slow down to 170. And now what we're going to do is we're going to watch the glide slope diamond here. So as soon as that turns pink, just like this one did, we're going to wait for it to get around this one dot above. So there it goes. So it's captured. So now when it gets to around one dot is when we're going to hit the approach button. You can see we kind of overshot the localizer, but it's pulling us back in now, so that's okay. And there's our runway that we're going to be landing on, runway 10. Alright, so we're one dot above, so we're going to hit approach. And that will capture just like the localizer. See this GNS here? That will turn green when it captures. There it goes, it captured. So we're going to slow down to our final approach speed, +5. We're going to put our gear down. And we're going to go flaps 15. Alright, now we're going to go through our landing procedures. We're going to turn our lights on. Throw our switches to continuous. We're going to arm our speed brake. And now we're ready to land. I don't know if you can hear that train in the background. I live close to a railroad track, so sorry if you hear a train. Alright, so all we're doing, we're waiting for this to come down about at 1,600 feet. So when I get to about 1,000 feet, I'm going to take over. So one other thing about the Zibo is you see this blue indicator here? That tells me where my joystick throttle is relative to the actual throttles. So I'm going to line those up so that when I take over the throttle, I don't have a surge in power suddenly. So it's coming down nice and easy. We're 1,100 feet. Alright, there's 1,000 feet, so I'm going to disengage the autopilot, disengage the auto throttle, and now I'm just going to hand fly it all the way to the rest of the end. So what I'm doing is I'm following those diamonds on the bottom and on the side, and I'm watching my speed as well. And again, this takes a little practice, but once you do it, several times, you'll get the hang of it. Just want to kind of keep your vertical speed below 1,000 feet per minute. Make sure I'm still aligned here. I'm a little fast, so I'm going to take out a little bit of speed.
400.
I'm going a little right, so I'm going to correct. We get a little high, so I'm going to go down.
300.
Alright, now I'm low, so I'm good.
200.
Alright. We're going to pull up a little bit.
50, 40, 30, 20.
Raise up. Kill my throttle. Float a little bit, put a little power in. Pull back. Alright, we touched down. So there goes auto brake and the spoilers. I'll hold my reversers. There's 80 knots. So I'll kill the reversers and I'll mainly brake. I'll go ahead and turn off my auto brake. Now I'm just coasting down to where I can turn off. Alright, and that was a fairly good landing. It was a little long, but that's okay. We had a long runway. Alright, so as I'm turning off, I'm going to go ahead and clean up my flaps. I'm going to clean up my spoilers. I'm going to turn my landing lights off. I'm going to turn my strobes off. I'm going to turn back towards the terminal. And I'm going to turn on my APU. That way when we turn our engines off, we won't lose power. So again, you're just holding until you see the needle start moving. Takes it a second. Come on. You can do it. There it goes. So we'll let go. We'll turn our starter switches back to auto. And there we go. Now we just taxi back to the terminal. Fairly short taxi, so I'll keep you guys on with me while we taxi back. Again, like I said, it takes practice to have good landings. That's all I can really say. There's no secret technique. It's just practice and practice and more practice. Like I said, I've been flying the 737 for around 1,000 hours now. Between I used to fly Flight Simulator 10, and then I flew that for several years, and now I fly X-Plane 11. I made the switch and I love it. So this is where I'm going to be for a while until something else better comes along. But again, between FSX and X-Plane 11, I've flown the 737 for over 1,000 hours. So, like I said, practice makes perfect, and that's true with anything you do. All right, we're going to park at this gate right here in front of us. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn off our forward lights so we don't blind the guys at the gate. And we're just going to slowly come in. Slow down a little bit. Usually you'd have a marshaller there depending on what airport you have, but I'm just kind of eyeballing it. We're going to wait till the jetway is about at our shoulder, and we'll stop it right there. So we'll put on the parking brake, make sure our APU generator is turned on, and then we'll kill the engines. Alrighty, well, that was a pretty successful flight. Again, like I said, I just wanted to do a short flight where I kind of give you a top-level tutorial of this great aircraft. Again, you know, the Zibo team is an incredible team that's, you know, giving you such a great aircraft for free. And, you know, I really appreciate it. It's a great thing for the community, and I really hope you go out and get this aircraft so that you can practice and get really good at it. But I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you liked it, please hit that like and subscribe button. I'll do more tutorials as needed. Again, if you want me to do another tutorial on like the tablet or how to download this thing or something else I need to go more in depth in, just let me know and I'll be happy to do it. But until then, I'm X Fly Guy. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.